welcome to your deep dive.
Uh,
You guys wanted to know more about, like how we talk to each other, and honestly, so did I.
yeah.
The stack of research you send over about conversational style, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's a really cool topic.
Get ready to learn how to avoid some seriously awkward encounters and maybe even save a marriage or two.
That's right. Did you know one of Dr. Tannen's students claims her marriage was actually saved because of what she learned about communication styles?
Whoa, hold on. I got to know more about this marriage saving stuff.
Yeah.
Was it like a light bulb moment for her?
Apparently so.
Like, was she completely oblivious before?
Yeah, she really had no idea. Think about it. We've all had those conversations that just felt off.
Oh,
Turns out there's actually a reason for that. It's not always about what's being said, but how it's being said. These unspoken differences in communication styles, if we don't understand them, they can really impact our relationships, even lead to some unnecessary conflict.
okay. So what can we do about it? I don't want to keep stumbling through these conversations and feeling like I have no idea what's going on.
Well, the key is to understand the different components of conversational style. Think of it like this. You have the signals, which are the basic building blocks of how we speak. Things like how loud or fast we talk, right?
Okay.
Then you have the devices, the strategies we use to navigate a conversation, like taking turns or asking questions.
Uh-huh.
And finally, you've got rituals, the expected back and forth we do in certain situations, which can vary widely across cultures.
Wait, so you're saying even something as simple as asking, can you pass the salt, can be like a potential minefield?
It really can. Imagine a situation where, okay, a British waitress asks, gravy?
Hmm.
With a rising intonation. It sounds like a genuine question.
Okay.
Now, picture a Pakistani waitress offering gravy, but with a falling intonation. Same word, but completely different vibe, right?
Yeah, it's like the British waitress is asking if you want gravy, while the Pakistani waitress is more like, here's your gravy, deal with it.
Exactly. And that's just one tiny example of how cultural norms for conversational rituals can lead to misinterpretations, even offense, without anyone intentionally being rude.
Wow, my mind is blown. I'm starting to see how these seemingly small differences can create massive misunderstandings.
Let's look at those signals a little closer. For example, someone who speaks very softly might be perceived as timid or unsure, right?
Right.
While someone who speaks loudly might be seen as aggressive or dominant. And it's not just about volume. The speed at which we speak, the pauses we use, even our intonation can all send subtle messages. And they're interpreted differently depending on our individual styles and cultural backgrounds.
So how do we avoid stepping on those conversational landmines? Do we need to become experts in every communication style out there?
That would be a tall order. But luckily, there are some strategies we can use to become more attuned to those subtle cues and avoid those miscommunications. One of the most important things is to simply be aware that these differences exist. Recognize that not everyone communicates the same way you do, and be open to interpreting those differences in a generous way.
Okay, that makes sense. Awareness is key. What else?
Well, remember what we said about devices? Things like taking turns and asking questions can be tricky. Think about the poor woman who got compared to the FBI on a blind date simply because of how she asked questions.
Oh, no, that's brutal.
Mm-hmm.
What was she doing, grilling him about his childhood trauma or something?
Maybe not that extreme, but I bet she wasn't pacing her questions or reading his nonverbal cues very well. It's amazing how the same question, what do you do, can signal genuine interest to one person and then feel intrusive to another. It all comes down to those subtle cues, like tone of voice and body language.
So it's not just about the words themselves, it's about the whole package.
Precisely, and that's where framing comes in. Think of it like setting the stage for a play. The words of the actors, right? But the framing is the scenery, the lighting, the music. It creates the context and tells the audience how to interpret the performance, is how we signal the intention behind our words.
Can you give me an example? I'm a little lost on how this works in real life.
Okay, think about that joke about the guy who's holding a whip and offering to take people to the next village for half price. He never actually says he has a horse and carriage, right?
Right. But everyone just assumes he does because, well, why else would he have a whip?
Exactly. The whip acts as a framing device, setting up an expectation that he's a driver with some mode of transportation.
Makes sense.
And because we share a common cultural understanding of whips and transportation, we automatically fill in the blanks. We make assumptions based on that frame.
So framing is about creating a shared reality with the person we're talking to, even if it's not explicitly stated.
Exactly. And when those frames align, conversation flows smoothly. We feel a sense of connection and understanding, but when those frames clash or are misaligned, that's when we run into trouble.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. So we've got signals, devices, rituals, and framing. Anything else we need to add to our conversational toolkit?
One more crucial element: power and solidarity. We're constantly negotiating both closeness and hierarchy in our communication, and these dynamics profoundly influence our linguistic choices.
Wait, so you're telling me even something as simple as calling someone by their first name can be like a power move?
It absolutely can be. Remember the story about the grandmother called Millie by the nurses in the nursing home?
Hmm.
She loved it because it made her feel included, but her grandson felt it was disrespectful because it ignored her age and position, right? That's power and solidarity in action.
Wow, this is deep. So how do we balance respect for hierarchy with, a desire for connection, especially when those two things seem to be in conflict?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore more in a bit. But for now, just remember that power and solidarity are always at play in our communication, shaping everything from how we address each other to how we phrase our requests. The key is to be aware of these dynamics and adjust our communication accordingly.
I'm already starting to see my own conversations in a whole new light. This is amazing.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And we've only just scratched the surface. Get ready to dive even deeper into the world of conversational style as we explore how these concepts play out in different scenarios and learn practical strategies for becoming more effective communicators. It's funny how we were just talking about asking questions. Turns out even the most straightforward questions can become like conversational tripwires.
You're telling me I'm still cringing over that FBI blind date story.
Oh, yeah.
Makes you realize how much power we hold in those seemingly simple interactions.
Absolutely. And it all circles back to those subtle signals and devices we were talking about, right? The same question, like what you do for a living, can be interpreted in vastly different ways, depending on how it's framed.
Hmm.
And the meta message is conveyed through tone, pacing, body language, all that.
So, if someone asks me about my work with a genuine smile and a relaxed posture, it feels like a friendly inquiry.
Mm,
But if they ask with a flat tone and like a skeptical eyebrow raise, it suddenly feels like an interrogation.
exactly. It's those subtle cues that often determine whether a question feels like an invitation to connect or an intrusion into our personal space.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced both sides of that.
Oh, for sure.
Sometimes you ask a question with the best of intentions, but your delivery just unintentionally makes the other person feel uncomfortable or even attacked.
It happens to the best of us. We're not always aware of our own communication patterns, right?
Right.
And how they might be perceived by others. It's like that example from the source material about the doctor examining the child with cerebral palsy. She kept switching between all these different communication styles, depending on whether she was talking to the child, the mother, or even like imagining a group of medical students watching a recording.
Whoa, that's a lot to juggle. It's like she's playing multiple roles in the same conversation.
Right.
No wonder she preferred the one-way mirror.
Right. It highlights how we're constantly navigating multiple frames in conversation, adjusting our language based on the situation and the people involved. And sometimes those frames can clash,
Oh, yeah?
leading to, miscommunication and confusion.
It makes you realize just how much, like, mental gymnastics goes on in a simple conversation. We're constantly decoding signals, interpreting framing, trying to gauge the power dynamics at play.
And those dynamics can be particularly tricky to navigate. Remember how we were talking about the tension between power and solidarity? Well, those forces are constantly influencing our communication choices, even when we're not consciously aware of them.
Right, like how calling someone by their first name can be a sign of closeness in one context,
Yeah.
but a total power move in another. It's like this invisible dance where we're constantly trying to find the right balance.
Exactly. And that dance can get especially complicated when we consider like the ambiguity and polysemy of those power and solidarity signals. Sometimes the same linguistic move can signal both closeness and hierarchy,
Yeah.
making it difficult to interpret the other person's true intentions.
Can you give me an example? My brain is starting to hurt trying to keep track of all these nuances.
Think about the act of talking along with someone while they're speaking.
Okay.
In some contexts, it might be seen as a sign of enthusiasm and connection, right? Showing that you're on the same wavelength. But in other situations, it could be perceived as rude or a way of dominating the conversation.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, if you're both really excited about a topic and you finish each other's sentences, it can feel like a fun bonding experience.
Uh,
But if someone constantly interrupts you or talks over you, it can feel like they're trying to silence you or assert their dominance.
exactly. The same behavior can have completely different meanings depending on the context, the relationship between the speakers, and all those subtle cues they're sending through their tone and body language.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. It seems like there's no one-size-fits-all approach to interpreting conversational style.
Mm.
We need to be, like, constantly paying attention to the context, the relationship, all those subtle signals and cues,
Yeah.
to avoid making the wrong assumptions.
You're absolutely right. It's all about developing what we call conversational intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Which is the ability to read between the lines, pick up on those nuances, and adapt your communication style accordingly. Think of it like becoming a conversational detective, always looking for clues to understand the other person's perspective and intentions.
This is making me realize how much room there is for misinterpretation in even the most casual conversations.
It's true. We often project our own assumptions and biases onto other people's communication styles without even realizing it. And that can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings and unnecessary conflict.
So what can we do to become more like mindful communicators and avoid those conversational pitfalls?
Well, first and foremost, remember that awareness is key. Just by being conscious of these different communication styles, you're already ahead of the game.
Okay, awareness is a good starting point. What else?
Active listening is crucial. Don't just focus on what you're going to say next.
Right.
Really tune into the other person's words, their tone, their body language. Try to understand their perspective, even if it's different from your own.
That makes sense. But what if you're in a situation where you're pretty sure there's a communication style clash happening?
Yeah.
Like, how do you navigate that without making things worse?
That's a great question, and one we should definitely address. Sometimes the best approach is to simply acknowledge the difference in communication styles.
So, like, saying something like, hey, I'm noticing that we seem to have different ways of communicating. Maybe we can try to.
Exactly. You could suggest slowing down the conversation, clarifying your intentions, or simply asking the other person to explain their perspective more fully. The key is to approach the situation with curiosity and a willingness to find common ground.
This is such helpful advice. I'm already feeling more confident about navigating those tricky conversational waters.
I'm glad to hear that. Remember, communication is a skill, and like any skill, it takes practice and attention to develop. The more you pay attention to these dynamics, the better you'll become at reading between the lines, adapting your style, and building stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on how we communicate and connect with each other.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you. And remember, the journey of understanding conversational style is ongoing. There's always more to learn and discover about this fascinating world of human communication.
You know what's amazing to me is how much we rely on these unspoken rules of communication to, navigate our daily interactions. I'm starting to see conversational style everywhere.
Yeah, it's like you've unlocked a secret code. Once you start paying attention to these dynamics, you can't unsee them.
Exactly. And it's making me realize that a lot of those awkward encounters I had in the past, they probably just boil down to like mismatches in communication styles.
That's a pretty common experience. We
Right.
often attribute those miscommunications to like personality clashes or bad intentions,
Oh, yeah.
when in reality, it's just a matter of different communication styles at play.
It's like we're speaking different dialects of the same language, but we don't have a translator.
That's a great analogy. And just like with language dialects, there's no one right way to communicate. It's all about understanding the nuances and adapting our approach accordingly.
One thing I'm still kind of grappling with is like
Yeah.
how to deal with those situations where you're pretty sure a clash of communication styles is creating tension or conflict.
Yeah,
Like, how do you address that without making things worse?
that's a great question. It can be a delicate dance, but there are some strategies that can help. First, remember that awareness is key. Simply recognizing that a difference in communication styles might be at play can help you approach the situation with more empathy and understanding.
Okay, awareness is a good starting point.
Yeah.
But what comes next? Do you just come right out and say, hey, I think we're communicating differently?
You certainly could. Sometimes simply acknowledging the difference can help clear the air. You could say something like, I'm noticing that we seem to have different ways of communicating. Maybe we could try to slow down a bit and make sure we're understanding each other.
That sounds a lot less confrontational than like accusing someone of being a terrible communicator.
Exactly. It's about framing the issue in a collaborative way,
Right.
as a shared challenge to overcome rather than a personal attack.
What if the other person isn't receptive to that kind of feedback? Like, what if they're totally unaware of their own communication style and how it's impacting others?
That can definitely be tricky. In those cases, it might be helpful to focus on specific behaviors rather than making, generalizations about their communication style.
So instead of saying you're too indirect, you might say something like, I'm having trouble understanding what you need from me. Could you be more direct with your request?
Exactly. By focusing on specific behaviors and their impact on you, you're less likely to trigger defensiveness and more likely to open up a constructive dialogue.
These are such practical tips. I'm already feeling more equipped to, handle those tricky conversations.
I'm glad to hear it. Remember, communication is a skill, and like any skill, it takes practice. The more you pay attention to these dynamics and experiment with different approaches, the more confident and effective you'll become.
This deep dive has been such a valuable experience. I feel like I've gained, a whole new level of awareness about the subtle ways we communicate and connect with each other.
It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you. And remember, the journey of understanding conversational style is ongoing. Keep observing, keep learning, and keep practicing those communication skills.
Okay, listeners, that's a wrap on our deep dive into conversational style. We've covered a lot of ground today, from signals and devices to framing, power dynamics, and even how to navigate those tricky communication clashes. Remember, communication is a two-way street. So the next time you find yourself in a conversation that feels a little off, take a moment to consider the other person's communication style. It might just change your whole perspective. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing. And remember, a little bit of conversational intelligence can go a long way.